It's the late 19th century, decades after the American Civil War has ended, and the Southern press is absolutely tearing apart the Confederacy's most capable surviving general. They are dragging his name through the mud, calling him stubborn, insubordinate, and outright blaming him for losing the Battle of Gettysburg, and, by extension, the entire war. How does that happen? How does Lieutenant General James Longstreet, the man Robert E. Lee affectionately called his old war horse, the guy who anchored the Confederate line in almost every major battle in the East, become the ultimate villain of the South? For 150 years, the popular narrative has been that Longstreet choked at Gettysburg. The story goes that he dragged his feet, sulked because Lee didn't listen to his advice, and doomed the Confederacy. But if we strip away the post-war politics, the myth-making, and the hero worship of Robert E. Lee, and instead look at the dirt, the blood, and the raw psychology of July 1863, a completely different story emerges. Let's be real for a second. Longstreet's tragedy at Gettysburg wasn't a failure of courage. It wasn't a failure of obedience. It was the agonizing, heartbreaking clash between a modernist tactical visionary and a commander who was still chasing a Napoleonic phantom. Longstreet saw the future of warfare, and he was forced to watch his men march into a meat grinder anyway. To really understand what happened in those 3 days in Pennsylvania, you can't just look at a map of troop movements. You have to understand the man who fought the battle, the brutal reality of the ground, and the unforgiving, cutthroat politics of post-war America that needed a scapegoat. So, let's talk about the guy who was right and how history punished him for it. Born in South Carolina and raised in Georgia, Longstreet ended up at West Point, and frankly, he wasn't exactly a stellar student. He graduated 54th out of a class of 62 in 1842. But West Point gave him something much more important than decent grades: a massive, incredibly tight-knit social network. It was here that he formed a deep, enduring friendship with a guy named Ulysses S. Grant. In fact, Longstreet actually introduced Grant to his future wife, Julia Dent. They were that close. Remember this? Because that friendship with Grant is going to completely detonate Longstreet's life after the war. Like most of the officers who would go on to command in the Civil War, Longstreet got his first taste of real combat in the Mexican-American War. He fought alongside the same guys he'd eventually be shooting at, and he fought bravely. At the Battle of Chapultepec, he was charging forward, carrying the regimental colors, when he caught a bullet in the thigh. He handed the flag off to his buddy, a guy named George Pickett, and kept going until he passed out. He learned two things in Mexico. He learned how to be cool under fire, and he learned the traditional Napoleonic infantry tactics that everyone else learned. You line up, you march forward, you overwhelm the enemy with a bayonet charge. But by the time the Civil War kicked off in 1861, Longstreet's brain was already starting to evolve past those old-school tactics. As he rose through the ranks of the Army of Northern Virginia, becoming Lee's most trusted subordinate, he started to look at the math of the battlefield. The weapons had changed. The rifled musket was now standard issue. This wasn't the smooth-bore musket of the Napoleonic Wars, where you had to be practically standing on top of a guy to hit him. The rifled musket could kill a man accurately from hundreds of yards away. Longstreet realized something terrifying. Frontal assaults were basically mass suicide. You can see this doctrine really crystallize in Longstreet's mind in late 1862 at the Battle of Fredericksburg. While Stonewall Jackson was all about aggression, lightning strikes, and risky flanking maneuvers, Longstreet became the anvil. At Fredericksburg, Longstreet parked his men behind a massive stone wall at Marye's Heights. He had his artillery chief overlap their fields of fire so tightly that he bragged, "A chicken could not live on that field when we open on it." And he was right. The Union Army charged that stone wall all day long, and Longstreet's men just mowed them down from total safety. It was a slaughter. This was Longstreet's aha moment. He figured out the cheat code for modern warfare: the strategic offensive, tactical defensive. His whole philosophy became this: don't attack entrenched enemies. Instead, invade their territory strategically. Threaten a major city like Washington, D.C. Force the enemy to chase you. Find some really good high ground. Dig in and make them attack you. Make them do the dying. By the summer of 1863, Longstreet is absolutely convinced that this is the only way the South can win the war. He takes this modernist mindset, this absolute certainty that defense wins battles, and he marches north into Pennsylvania. The problem is, Robert E. Lee is marching north with a completely different mindset. Lee is looking for his Austerlitz. He is looking for one massive, decisive, offensive strike to annihilate the Union Army and win the war in a single afternoon. These two opposing philosophies are about to collide head-on in a small Pennsylvania crossroads town, and it is going to tear the Confederate High Command apart. To understand the absolute mess that Gettysburg became, you have to understand the shape the Confederate Army was in when they crossed into Pennsylvania in June 1863. Just a month prior, the South had won a massive victory at Chancellorsville, but it came at a catastrophic cost. Stonewall Jackson was accidentally shot by his own men and died. To compensate, Robert E. Lee completely reorganized his army. He split it from two massive infantry corps into three smaller ones. He promoted Richard Ewell and A.P. Hill to command the new corps, leaving James Longstreet as the only senior commander who had actually managed an operation of this size before. Longstreet was the veteran anchor. Everyone else at the top was basically learning on the job. But the real crisis wasn't the infantry, it was the cavalry. In 1863, you didn't have drones, satellites, or radio. Your cavalry was your eyes and ears. They rode ahead of the army to find the enemy, map the roads, and figure out the terrain. Lee's cavalry commander was the legendary, flamboyant J.E.B. Stuart. But on the march into Pennsylvania, Stuart took his cavalry on a massive glory-hunting joyride around the Union Army and got entirely cut off. For a week leading up to the biggest battle of the war, Lee and Longstreet were operating completely blind. Imagine driving an 18-wheeler down a twisting mountain road in pitch darkness and somebody smashed your headlights. That is the operational terror the Confederate High Command was dealing with. They didn't know exactly where the Union Army was, how fast they were moving, or who was leading them. Because they were blind, the Battle of Gettysburg didn't start as some brilliant pre-planned masterstroke. It started on July 1st as a total accident. Elements of a P. Hill's corps literally stumbled into Union cavalry near the town, and what started as a skirmish escalated wildly out of control into a massive bloody bar brawl. Longstreet was miles away when the shooting started. By the time he finally rode onto the battlefield late in the afternoon on July 1st, the fighting had mostly stopped for the day. But when he raised his binoculars and looked at the terrain, his blood must have run cold. The Union Army had been pushed back through the town, but they had rallied and dug in on a massive fishhook-shaped series of hills, Cemetery Hill and Culp's Hill. It was the absolute worst-case scenario for Longstreet. The enemy was concentrating, they had the high ground, and they were bringing up artillery. It was Fredericksburg all over again, but this time, The Confederacy was the one standing at the bottom of the hill. When the sun comes up on the morning of July 2nd, the situation has gone from bad to apocalyptic. The rest of the Union Army has arrived overnight, and they are fortifying a massive line stretching south down Cemetery Ridge toward two rocky hills called the Round Tops. Longstreet looks at this setup and immediately knows that a frontal assault against that line is going to be a bloodbath. It violates everything he believes about modern warfare. So, he turns to Lee and pitches his alternative, the flank march. Longstreet basically says, "Look, we can't attack this. Let's pack up our gear, move south, swing completely around the Union left flank, and put our army between them and Washington, D.C. If we threaten the capital, they will be forced to abandon this high ground and attack us on ground of our choosing." For 150 years, armchair generals and history nerds have argued relentlessly over this exact moment. Was Longstreet pitching a stroke of strategic genius, or was he suggesting a logistical fantasy? If you look purely at lines on a map, Longstreet's idea sounds brilliant. But wars aren't fought on paper. Let's look at the brutal, physical reality of the ground. To pull off this flank march, Longstreet is asking the army to pull out of their lines, turn sideways, and march tens of thousands of men, artillery pieces, and miles of clunky supply wagons across narrow, unfamiliar country roads. And remember the blindfold? J.E.B. Stuart is still missing. Without cavalry to act as a screen, moving an entire army laterally across the front of the enemy is incredibly dangerous. If the Union Army caught wind of the movement, they could just launch a massive attack straight into the side of the marching Confederate column. Without cavalry to warn them or protect the supply wagons, the Army of Northern Virginia could have been sliced in half and destroyed in detail. Was Longstreet right that attacking Cemetery Ridge was a suicide mission? Absolutely. But was his alternative actually physically possible, given the lack of intelligence and cavalry? A lot of modern historians argue it was a logistical pipe dream. Robert E. Lee listens to his old war horse. He considers the flank march. But Lee is an aggressive, Napoleonic thinker, and he doesn't want to maneuver. He wants to fight. He famously points a finger toward the Union lines and tells Longstreet, "The enemy is there, and I am going to attack him there." Longstreet famously replies, "If he is there, it will be because he is anxious that we should attack him. A good reason, in my judgment, for not doing so." But the debate is over. The trap is officially set. Longstreet is handed orders he believes with every fiber of his being will destroy his men. He doesn't have the authority to change the plan, but he has the crushing responsibility of executing it. So, it's the afternoon of July 2nd. Lee has explicitly rejected the flank march and ordered Longstreet to take his corps, march to the far right of the Confederate line, and smash into the Union left flank. This brings us to one of the most intensely debated controversies of the entire Civil War: the Sulk. If you read the post-war memoirs written by Lee's biggest cheerleaders, they paint a picture of Longstreet acting like a petulant child. They claim he dragged his feet, deliberately delayed the attack, and pouted because he didn't get his way. They argue that if Longstreet had just attacked earlier in the day, the South would have won. But let's look at the actual reality of the ground and the brutal psychology of command. Longstreet is experiencing profound cognitive dissonance. He is a fiercely loyal subordinate, being ordered by a man he deeply respects to execute a maneuver he is mathematically certain will fail. But he's a soldier. He gets the order, and he moves out. The march takes hours, and this is where the foot-dragging accusations usually stem from. But why did it take so long? Because Longstreet's column was spotted. As his men were marching into position, they crested a ridge and suddenly realized they were in plain view of a Union signal station perched on top of Little Round Top. If Longstreet kept marching down that road, the Union Army would know exactly where he was, exactly how many men he had, and they would blast his column to pieces with artillery before his guys even had a chance to form a battle line. The element of surprise, the only advantage Longstreet had left, was about to evaporate. So, Longstreet makes a battlefield command decision. He orders a countermarch. He turns his massive column of thousands of men around and painstakingly reroutes them through the woods to keep them hidden from the signal station. It's hot, it's exhausting, and it eats up hours of daylight. Was this Longstreet throwing a tantrum? Or was it the desperate adaptation of a commander trying to protect his soldiers from getting slaughtered before the battle even started? Given everything we know about Longstreet's obsession with preserving the lives of his men, the countermarch wasn't a sulk, it was a tactical necessity. When Longstreet's men finally smash into the Union lines late in the afternoon, it is an absolute nightmare. We are talking about some of the most visceral, chaotic, hand-to-hand combat in American history. The names of these locations are etched into military infamy: the Peach Orchard, the Wheat Field, Devil's Den. It is a literal meat grinder. And where is Longstreet during all of this? He isn't sitting in a tent in the rear pouting. He is right in the thick of it. He is riding his horse directly behind the battle lines, cheering his men on, directing artillery fire, and exposing himself to extreme danger. His tactical faith in the plan is zero, but his physical courage never wavers. His men fight like absolute demons. They bleed the Union Army dry, nearly snapping the left flank in half. But, exactly as Longstreet predicted, the Union's interior lines and high ground allow them to just keep pouring reinforcements into the gap. By nightfall, the attack stalls out. The ground is covered in thousands of bodies, and the Union line, battered and bruised, still holds the high ground. When the sun comes up on July 3rd, Longstreet is probably thinking that after the bloodbath of the previous day, Robert E. Lee has finally seen reason. The flanks are too strong. The high ground is impregnable. Surely, Lee is going to agree to move the army now. Instead, Lee points to the very center of the Union line on Cemetery Ridge and says, "We attack there." This is the breaking point. This is the moment Longstreet's heart shatters. He looks out over the field. It is roughly a mile of wide-open, gently sloping farmland, leading right up to a fortified stone wall lined with Union infantry and bristling with dozens of cannons. To reach that wall, his men will have to march in neat, tight formations across that open field while getting hammered by artillery from the front and from the sides. Longstreet turns to Lee. He doesn't hold back. He delivers one of the most famous, chillingly accurate quotes of the entire war. "General, I have been a soldier all my life. I have been with soldiers engaged in fights by couples, by squads, companies, regiments, divisions, and armies, and should know, as well as anyone, what soldiers can do. It is my opinion that no 15,000 men ever arrayed for battle can take that position. It is pure math versus pure Napoleonic romance. Longstreet sees the range of the rifled muskets, the angles of the artillery, and the impossibility of the physics. Lee just sees the invincible spirit of his infantry. Lee ignores the math. The order stands. It will be known to history as Pickett's Charge. What happens next is a deep dive into the psychology of a man who is trapped. Longstreet literally cannot bring himself to give the final order. He tries to pass the buck. He tells his artillery chief, E. Porter Alexander, to open fire on the Union lines with over 100 cannons. He gives Alexander a desperate backdoor order. If the artillery doesn't drive the Union troops away, do not let Pickett charge. It's the psychological maneuvering of a man desperate for a reason, any reason, to call off a suicide mission without technically disobeying Robert E. Lee. The artillery duel shakes the earth for hours, but through the thick, choking smoke, Longstreet knows the truth. The Union guns aren't destroyed, they are just waiting. Finally, the guns fall silent. The smoke begins to clear. Major General George Pickett, a flamboyant officer with long, perfumed ringlets in his hair, and remember, Longstreet's old buddy who took the flag from him when he was shot in Mexico, rides up to his commander. Pickett asks, "General, shall I advance?" Longstreet looks at him. He knows that in about 20 minutes, half of the men standing behind Pickett are going to be dead or maimed. The weight of command, the cognitive dissonance, the sheer tragedy of the moment completely breaks him. Longstreet cannot speak. He physically cannot form the words to send his men to their deaths. He just looks at Pickett, bows his head, and weeps. He gives a slow, heavy nod. Pickett salutes, says, "I shall lead my division forward, sir," and rides off into the history books. Longstreet watches them go, knowing he was right, knowing the math was correct, and knowing it didn't matter at all. The duty of the soldier had completely overridden the conscience of the man. If the story ended at Appomattox in 1865, James Longstreet probably would have gone down in history as exactly what Robert E. Lee called him, the old war horse, the undeniable MVP of the Army of Northern Virginia. But the story didn't end there. And what Longstreet did next was, in the eyes of the White South, far worse than losing a battle. He committed the ultimate unpardonable sin. He accepted reality. After the war, Longstreet moved his family to New Orleans to work in the cotton and insurance business. When he looked around at the devastated South, his pragmatic, mathematical brain, the same brain that calculated the angles of the artillery at Fredericksburg and the rifled muskets at Gettysburg, assessed the political situation. He realized the South was conquered. Slavery was dead. The North had won, and resisting the federal government during Reconstruction was just going to cause more pointless bloodshed. So, Longstreet wrote a series of public letters, essentially saying, "We lost. We need to accept the results of the war, recognize the civil rights of the freed slaves, and cooperate with the federal government so we can rebuild." To the white Southern establishment, this was absolute heresy. But Longstreet didn't stop there. He actually joined the Republican Party, the party of Abraham Lincoln. And to pour salt in the wound, he rekindled his old West Point friendship with Ulysses S. Grant. When Grant became president, he gave Longstreet a federal job in New Orleans. Overnight, Longstreet went from a Confederate hero to a scalawag and a traitor. But the absolute point of no return happened in 1874. It was called the Battle of Liberty Place. A violent white supremacist paramilitary group known as the White League attempted to violently overthrow the Reconstruction-era state government in Louisiana. Longstreet, acting under the authority of the governor, commanded the state militia and the Metropolitan Police to stop them. Think about the sheer surrealism of this moment. Less than a decade after commanding the First Corps of the Confederate Army, James Longstreet is riding out in full uniform, commanding an armed, racially integrated police force, including black militia troops, to shoot at former Confederates who are trying to overthrow a biracial government. Longstreet was actually pulled from his horse, shot, and briefly taken prisoner by the White League before federal troops arrived to restore order. For the former Confederate High Command, this was the final straw. Longstreet wasn't just a political opponent, he was a race traitor. Now, let's look at the timeline. Robert E. Lee died in 1870. Almost immediately, a group of former Confederate officers, led by Jubal Early and Lee's former artillery chief, William Pendleton, formed the Southern Historical Society. Their goal was to create the mythology we now call the Lost Cause. They had a massive theological and psychological problem on their hands. In their minds, Robert E. Lee was a perfect, infallible Christian gentleman, and the Confederate cause was entirely righteous. So, why did God let them lose? If Lee was perfect, Gettysburg couldn't have been his fault. Someone else had to have ruined it. They looked around for a scapegoat, and there, sitting in New Orleans with a federal paycheck and a Republican voting record, was James Longstreet. Jubal Early and his cronies launched a massive, coordinated, decades-long smear campaign. They wrote articles, gave speeches, and aggressively rewrote the history of Gettysburg. They literally fabricated a story that Lee had ordered a sunrise attack on July 2nd, and that Longstreet had petulantly disobeyed it, dragging his feet and costing them the victory. Modern historians have thoroughly debunked the sunrise attack order. It never existed. They blamed Longstreet for the failure of Pickett's charge. They painted him as slow, stubborn, and intellectually inferior to Lee. Because Longstreet was a political outcast, very few Southerners came to his defense. History was being aggressively rewritten by the vanquished, and Longstreet was burned at the stake to keep the myth of Robert E. Lee perfectly intact. It took over a century for historians to really start digging through the mountain of lost cause propaganda and rediscover the actual James Longstreet. Was he a perfect general? Of course not. He was human. He made operational mistakes, he could be gruff, and his own post-war memoirs were often defensive, bitter, and poorly written, which didn't help his case. But when you strip away the politics and look at the blood-soaked ground of Pennsylvania in 1863, the verdict of time is overwhelmingly clear. Longstreet was right. He was a prophet crying out in the wilderness. He understood that the Industrial Revolution had permanently changed the math of human slaughter. He saw that the romance of the Napoleonic charge was dead, replaced by the cold mechanical reality of the rifled musket and the fortified trench. Robert E. Lee, for all his brilliance, was fighting the last war. Longstreet was trying to fight the next one. Gettysburg wasn't lost because Longstreet sulked. It was lost because Longstreet's tactical reality collided with Lee's strategic mythology, and the resulting explosion destroyed the Army of Northern Virginia. We are often told that history is written by the victors, but the ghost of James Longstreet reminds us of something far more insidious. History is often written by the people with the loudest megaphones, the deepest insecurities, and the most aggressive agendas. Longstreet teaches us to question the myths we are handed. He demands that we look past the statues and the hero worship to see the terrifying, agonizing burden of a man who saw the brutal future approaching, tried desperately to warn his friends, and had to watch his world burn down when they refused to listen.